Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mavens of Data. We've got a great show for you today. Megan is here, and she's going to be talking you through some career lessons, everything from her really interesting path to some of the greatest insights that she's uncovered as a podcast host. Here are some of the topics that we're going to be getting into today. Per usual, it'll be kind of a meandering conversation. But we'll definitely cover these points as well as a bunch more. So, Megan, I think with your background being so interesting, I'd say, I don't want to, unusual, I would say, and I think really fascinating, I'd love to start there because I think folks are going to be really curious. And when they hear kind of how you followed your passion to all these different areas, it would be great to start there.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, I think it is kind of an interesting background, and it's definitely a winding path. And some people are confused when they see where I started out. But yeah, I basically started out in college. I got a degree in industrial engineering, which it's not about building bridges. A lot of people think that. It's kind of about like, how can you optimize processes? How can you make things more efficient in the manufacturing world and in the business world? And so I really liked that degree, and I love school. Industrial engineering gave me a chance to kind of learn a little bit about a lot of different things, which I really enjoyed. And so, but it did make me feel like when I got to the end of that, I was like, what do I do next? I know a little bit about a lot of things. How do I proceed from here? So in school, I did 2 internships in process improvement in factories. The second one was actually at Tesla and their factory in Reno, and learned a lot about manufacturing and decided that was not the route of where I wanted to go. But those internships showed me that like the projects that I really liked, the tasks I liked, were when I got to like work in Excel or work with SQL, learn a little bit about that. Like any kind of data work, any kind of behind the scenes work, I really enjoyed. And so I, after college, took a job doing technical consulting, which turned out to be a lot more of like business management than really the hands-on technology implementation that I thought it was going to be. And so that was interesting. I basically quit that job after 6 months, which is not advisable, but it's what I needed to do because it made me too anxious, and it just like wasn't a great fit. And then I kind of was like, okay, where do I go from here? But knowing that I really liked the data pieces, I decided to do a data science boot camp online. So I don't know if people have questions about that, they can ask about that too, because sometimes people wonder if that's for them. But I really enjoyed it, kind of learned some more of those hard skills like Python and really getting into like machine learning models. And so that I had like a little more hands-on data science skills. And while I was doing that, I was also, this was like during COVID, and my COVID hobby was kind of writing a blog as well. And so kind of fell back in love with writing, and I was writing about like things that I wish I knew, you know, when I started out, or like, you know, data science, beginner tips, things like that. And so it was like through that blog that I ended up getting my first job in analytics at Stanley Black & Decker. And that was really great. I learned a lot there. That was where I first learned Alteryx. And yeah, I was a data analyst there for like 2 years. And then I was still creating some content on the side, like managing my blog. And then the opportunity opened up at Alteryx to join and kind of do that blogging about analytics full time and make another shift. So I decided to do that, and it's really fun. I love my job now, and now I get to just talk about analytics a lot. I get to do it a little bit, but talk about it a lot is what I would say.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's such a fun career path that you've already gotten to do such a wide variety of different things, which I think is just like everybody should strive for that if you can. It's to find out what you like, which is really great. I want to do a quick poll before I've got so many follow-up questions on the career, but I want to just do a quick poll to understand who's in the room. So folks, if you could quickly just tell us kind of where you're at in your career, this always helps us steer the conversation so that, you know, Megan and I can kind of understand where folks are at. So it looks like we've got kind of a lot of aspiring analysts, some folks in other roles, pretty good mix here. So yeah, all over the place. I think a lot of the advice that you'll have will apply to all of these folks, but always just good to get a sense for where these are. So one question for you. You talk about how you were creating content and like doing that along the side. How important do you think was that to your career?
Yeah, it ended up being very important, and I wasn't really expecting that because it was important, like, first of all, because it really helped me as I was like writing about these machine learning models I was learning about, like teaching other people a concept is kind of the key indicator that you've mastered that concept. And so it really like pushes you to know your stuff. So that was, I guess, one piece. But the bigger piece was just that it, as I continued to write more and submit to like publications on Medium and, see the audience grow, then it like opened up opportunities. Like basically, yeah, the job at Stanley and the job at Alteryx were because like a direct reach out to me because of like the articles I'd written. And so that piece I wasn't expecting, but it was kind of invaluable because to have someone reach out to you about a job when you're only a few years into your career, it was definitely like a game changer for me, at least.
Yeah, it really does change the dynamic from, submitting a online application where you're like one of 200 people to, hey, you've basically, marketed yourself so well that people are coming to you and you're sort of the one doing the filtering. I don't know if I'd be interested in this or not, right? Like always better to be hunted. So I feel like you did such a good job with that, and you've got a couple of roles out of that. How about for folks who are maybe interested in trying to employ that strategy, but they're not really sure like how to get started? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, it's definitely scary to start. I think that's the hardest part. I would say a few things. One is that an easy place to start is just if you find yourself at work, maybe explaining things to people, or people come to you for advice on certain topics, or, there's some sort of dashboard you put in place or analytic solution where people are asking about it, like that's an indicator it's good content that could be shared more broadly, that, whether you do a post on LinkedIn or a blog, it's something that like people want to learn about. Another good way to start is just kind of talking about things you wish you knew when you started out in whatever career you're in or whatever course you're in. That's like an easy place to write from. And then also, I think sometimes about like, there's a quote like, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, which is like, you might feel like you're not the most qualified person, but you'd be shocked about if you know the topic and you're good at writing or good at visuals or presenting, you'd be shocked at some of the messages you get. Like, I was 6 months in or even less into a data science course, and people were messaging me like, as a data science expert, what do you think about this? And I'm like, whoa. So like, you have to be careful with that. Don't talk about things you don't know about or haven't researched, but you would be surprised how you can present yourself with confidence online. And, if you do miss and somebody comments and stuff, it's an opportunity to learn, I think. Or you can always just take the post down if it doesn't really work. And so it's pretty like low stakes when you're starting out. It feels high stakes, but yeah.
I love that advice. I was pretty recently was in a similar spot with Maven. We started doing content, and like I had never been a social media person before, really didn't use any of it. And so just posting about data and things that we were doing felt really weird to me at first. And there's an interesting dynamic there where like at first it's really scary. The more you do it, the less scary it feels. And there's kind of two things that happen when you start sharing things online. One is it might go like really wide and a lot of people see it. And when that happens, it's because it was something that was good and people liked, like you gave value to the audience. And a lot of people tend to say, hey, thanks, this helped me and it feels good, right? And then the other way is like, it doesn't really go very wide because it's not as good. Not everything's going to be a winner, right?
Right.
But that stuff, nobody sees that. So like people think it's, oh, it's going to be embarrassing. Like I'm going to post this thing and people will realize it's a dud. But like basically by definition, no one will see that you're duds. They'll see the good value things that you create. So to me, that's always something that I try to tell people when they're getting started is like the scariest thing that you think is going to happen, like doesn't really ever happen. And it's you mostly get people saying like, hey, thanks. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to see the stuff that you're doing. So don't be scared. Like Megan saying she was nervous about it. I was super nervous about it. And now it just kind of, it's fun. It's a great way to get to know folks, which I think is awesome. Yeah. So have you mostly done the content writing on Medium before you were part of Alteryx, or were there other, like, were you using LinkedIn and any other platforms?
Yeah, the blogs were on Medium, and then I started using LinkedIn to kind of advertise the blogs and then kind of grow the network. And I started posting on LinkedIn as well. Awesome. So both of those platforms.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, that's it's really great. Would love to kind of talk a little bit about some of the stuff that has been going on with the podcast. So you've been hosting this podcast for over a year now, or maybe about a year. You've had a lot of great thought leaders there. Like, what are maybe some of your favorite takeaways? I know we talked about how much AI comes up, but whether it's AI or other topics, I guess, what are some of the favorite things that have come up after being a podcast host?
Yeah, there's a few things. One of my favorites, or what I find like super interesting, that it comes up like regardless of the guests we're having, it feels like. So, I mean, just a quick bit of background on the podcast. We really talk about like all things data. So we have a really wide variety of guests from all kinds of backgrounds, whether they're, you know, a data engineer building pipelines, or they're in supply chain working with data and they just switched over. So, or they're an AI expert. So a lot of different folks in the data field. But one thing that like comes up consistently is just like how important it is for analytics projects, for machine learning projects, to really like solidly define the business problem before working towards any solution. I know that sounds really basic, and like, of course you have to define your problem if you're going to solve it. But it's just surprising. It's, you know, it's easy to do, especially with AI being such a buzzword, you know, executives just wanting an AI solution. And there wasn't a real clear use case for it, a real clear problem or a definition where it's like, this is how this will solve this problem. And so, yeah, that's something interesting. And I've had multiple people say, you know, like, keep it simple. Like the best solution is the simplest, you know, if that's an Excel spreadsheet, that's an Excel spreadsheet. If it's a machine learning model, but a simple one, then it's a machine learning model. So it's like, you don't need a neural network for every problem, even if you can make those.
I think that one comes up so much, that like start with the business problem, because for folks that are like in the weeds in the data, you know, they know how to get their hands dirty. They know all the technical stuff. It's actually a major pitfall that does, like, it sounds simple, but sometimes us data people like dive past that, and like we start thinking too much about data structures and do we clean it? And it's like, hey, spend a little bit more time on just like really defining, what are you trying to do? What do you think the stakeholders, like, what are their goals? What are the metrics they care about? What are the actual levers? Like, what could you see someone doing on the business side as a result of an analysis you might put together? And if you start there, everything else kind of flows from that, and it's a lot easier. But it's funny that comes up so much, and it sounds so simple, like you're saying, but it's because, like, I'm guilty of it too. Sometimes it's like you get a little bit of the business problem and you start to think too detailed as the data expert, but you really want to pick your head up and think like the P&L owner first, and then apply those data skills. I think that's a really smart way to do. That's an awesome one. What else comes to mind from the podcast?
Something that's been coming up more frequently, more recently, is just like the importance of data storytelling, especially as maybe AI starts to automate more pieces of the cleaning or the more manual pieces or the code. There's already a lot of, low code, no code tools out there. Our product is one of those. So like, as more of that kind of part gets automated or gets easier, like the importance of being able to tell a story with your data is growing. And like, it's really important to focus on, the message that you're trying to communicate, tailoring your visuals to that, like working on your narrative, making sure it's talking to your audience. So yeah, I'm just kind of realizing both of these first takeaway. They're kind of business takeaways. It's like it's about analytics, but sometimes it really goes back to being good at business as well. But yeah, I think data storytelling is a super interesting field, and did a presentation about it for like our conference back in May. That was really fun, and so that's been a theme that we've just continued to talk about on the show.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another one that's like, it's so important. And again, for people that maybe tend to be, sort of, you call them left brain, like a little more technical, sometimes more introverted. Like, I think that's how I describe myself. I love like the data, the problem solving piece, telling a story isn't necessarily the most natural thing. And it's also not the hardest thing, but you have to really give it a conscious effort to do a good job on it. So I love that one's coming up. That's come up a lot on our show, and with a lot of folks asking a ton of questions about that too. So yeah, really good topic on that one.
Yeah. And then the last thing, I just really enjoy hearing a lot of stories on the podcast of just like how people are using our software. They're using Alteryx Designer or other pieces of it to just do really cool things, and like kind of hearing about the outcomes of like what analytics can achieve, whether that's saving people a lot of time, whether that's some people, use analytics to help with charities, to volunteer. We have like an Alteryx for Good branch. So it's like really cool to see the value that it brings in different ways, or just, how people are analyzing cool data, like, racing data where it's collected every 5 data points every second, I think it was, things like that. So there's a ton of like things we talk about on the podcast. I think you mentioned that there'll be a link to it. So definitely check it out if you like to hearing what people are doing with data and like best practices from thought leaders. It's really fun to get to talk to everybody on that.
Yeah, that's great. Megan, I don't know if this might be like not allowed, but I'm curious if any of the cool projects that people have done with Alteryx, like, is there any project that comes to mind that you think is like really interesting that might be worth talking about?
In terms of like what we've had on the show, I would say a few that come to mind are from this one like super user that we have had him on twice. The last time he came on, he was talking about analyzing NASCAR data. So it was like, as cars are getting faster and better, and there's becoming more like photo finishes, like any inch of improvement they can make with analytics helps and can have a competitive advantage. And so just like the massive amounts of like geolocation data that are being collected from every car, every second, and hearing about that was really interesting, and just some of the ways that he's been able to use analytics and modeling to like suggest improvements or to give feedback to racers or things like that. And the same user did a big kind of personal project too about climate change data. And it spanned many years for him, and learning tools, like it helped, I think, him learn Tableau or Alteryx better. I can't remember, but it was like his personal journey of like, I want to understand like climate change better, and really digging into the data and realizing just how much data there was, and then like working on building predictive models and then checking his predictions, and like learning about analytics and modeling while also kind of learning about climate change. So those were like a few examples that come to mind first, but yeah, there's a ton.
Yeah, it sounds really fun, folks. You should definitely check out the podcast if you haven't already. Again, there's a link there in the chat. Definitely seems like there's some gold in there. Megan, we talked about that, how much AI comes up, and that we definitely wanted to get into AI. Let's quickly get another quick poll for the audience. I'm curious what folks here think about AI. This is a pretty simple one, but just curious how often you guys are all using AI, whether that's in your work or your personal life. So yeah, a lot of people saying every day or every week. Yeah, it just seems to be, it's getting better so fast. It seems like a lot of people are using AI. We almost ask every guest on the show about kind of where they think things are headed, and especially I think for you, where you've talked to so many different thought leaders, you've probably heard so many good perspectives on this. I'm curious to kind of get your general take on where do you think AI is headed? How does it impact us in the data world?
Yeah, I think like how it impacts us in the data world. Something that I've heard from several thought leaders is just obviously there's like a lot of excitement around the technology, and there is like a lot of value it can bring, but like machine learning can only bring as much value as like your data has, as you're able to like feed into it. And so like the importance of like having good data pipelines, having, the good rich data and data governance that's making sure that you can rely on the quality of the data, like all of those pieces are like foundational. And I think, the companies that have those pieces figured out and then have like a solid foundation in data quality and governance and all of that, I think are going to be able to like see value out of implementing AI more quickly. But then I also think that we've talked a few times on the podcast about like AI adoption, and it kind of goes back to one of those takeaways we already talked about of defining the business problem, making sure that that there's kind of like a lot of, business problems surrounding adoption, a lot of like things to solve for outside of just being able to make a model that has good accuracy, like actually getting it adopted in the business. Like, how do you make sure that there's trust in the results? Can it explain the results? These are like, I feel like every piece I'm mentioning here is like a different person that came on the podcast. But like all of those pieces surrounding it are really important. I think it's just going to get easier and easier to use a tool or build a model that can have good accuracy, but like solving for like the maintenance of the model and the trust and the, what's the word? I don't know, like advertising it almost at your company or whatever that needs to look like. Those are the pieces that I think are important for companies to work on.
I think you're so right. There's certain things that, like, it doesn't matter how good an LLM is. Like if the underlying data is not there, you don't have that data pipeline, you're not doing the right things and getting the right inputs. It doesn't matter. And then on the kind of the back end of a project, the interpreting and communicating the results and trying to inspire people to action, like I haven't seen an LLM that necessarily does that. I think one thing that was really interesting when we were talking before, I hadn't thought of this angle, but I think you were talking about somebody had given advice on the data storytelling and presenting and how they're using ChatGPT or other LLMs to kind of help that. And I thought that was to me, it was kind of like a light bulb insight. I was like, I should be doing that. That sounds really smart. Would you mind talking about that a little bit for the audience?
Yeah. Back at the beginning of the year, we had Kat Greenbrook, who's a data storytelling expert, on the podcast, and we talked a little bit about AI at the end of the show, and she talked about a few ways that she uses ChatGPT, and basically the whole episode we talked about the importance of getting your message across and like tailoring it to the audience, understanding your audience. And so when she has an audience that she doesn't know as much about, like maybe she's presenting to supply chain professionals and she doesn't know, what are the metrics they care about? What are the, what's important to them? What's maybe some of the jargon? I don't know. She uses ChatGPT to kind of like learn more about the audience and maybe even, tailor some of her talking points. So kind of like using it as a research tool in a way, but specifically for, a data analytics presentation or a data storytelling use case.
Yeah, I loved that use case because for some reason that had never clicked to me, but I feel like that is something that they're really good at. If you said like, hey, I have this supply chain manager and I don't know much about what makes them tick and the language they speak, I feel like you could get a really good quick briefing on, hey, you got to nail these things. So it's so smart as like a thinking partner. I absolutely loved that advice. Hope folks in the audience are taking that one down because I feel like that's a gold nugget tip. Where do you think it all heads? Like, are you, I'm an analyst. Do you think I should be worried about my job in 5 years, 10 years? Like, where do you see stuff going?
I do think that like, it's like the capabilities of generative AI and other AI solutions are going to like rapidly kind of accelerate. Like, I don't want to be a downer, but I do think like, it's easy to look at the tools now and say like, oh, it doesn't even know grammar, or, oh, it doesn't even know how to do this. Like AI is not going to replace me. But I feel like the rapid progression we've seen just over the last few years for like image generation and video generation, I think it's going to keep getting better. And so I think like it's important to like have, I think like what can set you apart as an analyst now even is like having that domain knowledge, like really understanding your data and the context and your stakeholders and all of that. I feel like that's going to get more important as we automate more and more of like the data analyst job. It's kind of like the two ends, like the beginning, the data, the understanding, and then being able to like affect change in the business with like the output. I feel like those are going to be more important, and we might have to just like, I think it's important to stay up to date on like what technology is out there so that you don't get caught off guard if, your process that you're hired to do starts getting automated. Like, how do you continue to learn tools and, learn automation or learn like other ways you can be valuable handling the data or value you can add on top of the automation.
Yeah. I think I go back and forth on it like almost every day. I look at some of the things and I'm like, yeah, it makes code, but like it either doesn't run or it's maybe wrong or, oh, sometimes it's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times, like you mentioned in like image creation and video creation, unbelievable how fast it's come so quickly. So, those things do kind of spook me a little bit. And I think you're totally right. There's certain things that, it might be smarter to focus on, like the domain knowledge, I think you talked a little bit earlier about like data governance and building the pipelines
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. I'm curious, like if AI will really help much with that, or if that's kind of always gonna need that human judgment. These are things that it's hard to sort of understand even right now, like where could it go? But it's wild. I think no matter what, I think your advice to like keep up with the tools, make sure you're paying attention to it is really smart. Like imagine if, we're a little bit behind this, but imagine if, when we were starting our careers, the computer was just coming out. We were like, I don't want to learn to use a computer. You'd be in trouble pretty quickly down the road, right? You'd be a dinosaur. So I feel like in 5 or 10 years, if you don't know how to use these tools at a minimum, you're probably going to get outflanked by people that do. So yeah, I think that's really smart advice.
Yeah, and if someone can like really be a lot more productive with generative AI, maybe helping them. We had like a discussion thread on our community about like how are you using generative AI, and a lot of people were saying like those things that you normally have to memorize, pieces of code or common Google questions, like having generative AI help you with that. that can like speed you up as an analyst. And so like taking advantage of those pieces so that you kind of remain productive versus, you know, if you're not using any sort of technology, then your coworkers are going to start to get more productive than you, I guess. And so like there's a lot of, you know, little things you can leverage even starting now. That's what I kind of learned from some of our users on that thread. So
yeah, I think that's totally right. Like think about, say you're trying to do something with like a SQL script or Python code or something. And before it would be you Google, hopefully you get like a Stack Overflow result that's pretty close, but it's never going to be about the exact code that you want, you know, versus now you could tell it specific. So you can say like, I've got this table, I'm interested in these columns, and it, even if it's not perfect, it gets you pretty close a lot of the time. And so if you know how to manipulate things a little bit, it can just be a really good shortcut. Yeah, that's a good use case that today is already there, right? So yeah, really, really interesting. So we've got a lot of good questions here in the questions tab. Let me start with this one from Mark before, just because it's really on it's on the AI topic and it's in the chat tab before we lose it and pivot to the question. So Mark says, do you find AI hallucinating much, and is there any way to avoid it?
Yeah, we actually talked about this on an episode that's going out next week about like about explainable AI. I think that to me, I'm not, you know, an AI expert, but like we were talking about different ways that you can like add explainability to your AI model as a good way to check and catch hallucinations. And she mentions a few like different options, like I think it was like a SHAP model. Can't remember off the top of my head, but different ways that you can incorporate explainability into the model and also after the model. So, I mean, into the model would be ideal as opposed to afterwards. You kind of might be able to catch just right off the bat if it's hallucinating. You're like, that doesn't make sense, or that came out of nowhere. And then you can look at, you know, what was like the feature importance of like what features is it actually using here, and that can help you like figure out why the hallucination happened. But yeah, it does seem like I mean, with the rollout of like Google's AI, I guess that wasn't hallucination. I'm thinking of the Google AI assistant that was telling people to eat rocks, just a few a day. But you know, there's examples where you can screenshot of ChatGPT just sounding very confident, making things up. So I think it's like at this moment in time, obviously for generative AI, it's still important to like fact check. I do kind of like at least like the Google AI assistant, as well as like Perplexity, where they generate an answer and then they give you their sources, so you can at least start to see where that came from. But yeah, hopefully that answered the question. That was a little all over the place, but
yeah, no,
I would say it's still a problem.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one of the things that at Maven sometimes what we do in the internal team is, you know, I'll say, hey, I think this is what we should do, and I'm like 60% confident, right? I try to quantify my confidence in a statement, whether it's like the interpretation of some data or a path forward. And I really like that framework that that a human can do to sort of say like, yeah, I have this idea. I'll say sometimes like I'm 30% confident. You know, it's like I have an opinion, but don't trust me that much on this opinion, right? Versus like ChatGPT, like you say, or other LLMs, I haven't really seen that yet. It's always like a full confidence, whether it's perfectly accurate or completely inaccurate. I'd love something like that, like a confidence rating would be really interesting. But the sourcing, that is a nice improvement from like when we first saw LLMs a year and a half ago. The sourcing does really help. So let's get into some of these questions again. So we've got this question from Mark, and I'll read them out because in the replay videos, sometimes the questions themselves don't show up. So Mark says, how do you work with a team to understand a topic that someone wants you to analyze? for example, climate change, emissions, and how to use ChatGPT to develop questions. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, I like that the second part is a partial answer to the first part, I think, in a way. I mean, I think it definitely is a skill, like working with your stakeholders to really understand a topic that they want to analyze. I think that was something that I had to work on throughout, like when I was at Stanley Black and Decker, because depending on like the culture at the company, it could just be like they just give you this huge data file and they're like, can you like make a dashboard out of this? And it's just like a really vague request. And I think those are the hardest. I do think for something like that, like using ChatGPT to like do some kind of discovery, some research on, you know, if there's columns you don't know what they mean, or like, you know, tell me about ways that people analyze this type of data. Tell me about like what we would be interested in. So I guess it kind of just depends, you know, if you have stakeholders who are very clear on their business problem and what they need, it makes it a lot easier. But I think, yeah, talking to ChatGPT, talking like more with your stakeholders. I know like something that we've had people write on our blog about is like having more of a continuous feedback loop in the data analytics like development cycle. So, you know, you're not just grabbing the data, running with it, developing a solution, and they hear back from you a month later and you're like, here you go. And they're like, oh, this isn't what we wanted, but you didn't say what you wanted. So like having more of a cyclical where you come up with a very minimal MVP, or you come back even with questions before you start, like making sure that there's a lot more communication and like feedback, I think is important for those kind of like less structured requests for analyzing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like, yeah, another really good use case for having a good thinking partner to kind of get some of that information, almost as if you had access to more people just on demand to ask all these questions to. Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that's really good advice. There's one follow-up question that's kind of similar in the chat. It's related. Mark asked, is there an AI platform that you prefer to another? And I'd love to hear your answer, Megan. But I'd also love to hear from folks in the audience. We could crowdsource this too. If you guys could throw into the chat, is there a favorite place that you have, or something that has less hallucinations or better sourcing, or is better in general with data? I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that personally, but curious if you do, Megan, or if anybody in the audience does.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I've been enjoying like playing around with Perplexity, at least, especially for more of like that kind of research use case, because again, it gives you those like the sources that it pulls from, in addition to generating a response. And I do think that's what Google's starting to do as well. Yeah, in terms of like just LLMs, I would say I haven't like experimented a ton outside of like GPT and Gemini. I do think we're using Google Gemini as like the base for one of our AI products.
Cool.
But that's like still in development. But yeah, that's about all I've used. So would also be curious to hear in the chat what people are using.
Yeah, I've heard good things about Claude, but I've barely played around with it much myself.
Yeah.
I'd say I just kind of out of habit go to ChatGPT because I've figured out the plugins that I like. So I don't necessarily think it's the best, but for my use cases, that's where I typically, it's either like, usually for me, it's some research or, making a funny image for my daughter or something, but like it handles kind of the spectrum of things that I might need to do with AI.
Yeah.
Gemini's good for content. The line says, yeah, cool. All right. Well, if anybody has any other suggestions, I think, Perplexity for research is a good one. It is interesting that Google seems to be just like straight up taking their, their model for it. But it's, you copy what looks great. So
yeah. Well, they're taking like the UX, I guess, of it. I don't know. But I feel like I've seen a lot of posts on social about new things Perplexity is doing. So I feel like I need to check back in, or new ways that they're integrating education, different stuff. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it moves fast, definitely.
Yeah.
Here's another question from Taylor. This is like totally different topic, but an
Okay.
important one. How do you think we can encourage more women to look at data as a career option? It's a great question.
Yeah, I love that. Love that question. It's interesting. I was just talking about this with some people when it came to like data conferences, and there being like less women at them, and some people feeling like, oh, I'm not like supported here, I'm not going to go, things like that. And then like another person was like, no, we have to go, we have to like make other women feel welcome there. So I think like making like other women feel welcome, like if you're already in the data space, I mean, creating content like as about analytics, like as a female, I definitely like follow some cool female analytics like content creators on LinkedIn. I think like, I don't know, there's bigger things too that I don't know exactly how to solve for, but I would say like we talked to a lot of people on the podcast who find their way into analytics from different fields. Like that's pretty common. There's not a lot of people who are going out and getting an straight up analytics degree and starting right away. Maybe more now, like a data science degree, but like, you know, for managers across the board, like encouraging, you know, that career growth and that path regardless of gender. And I think like it's kind of tied into with like women in computer science and just kind of like the hard sciences. There's a lot of like cool programs. I was part of like Society of Women Engineers, and so like funding and supporting those types of programs to like reach women earlier, you know, when they're in education, and show them that that is an option for them.
Yeah. I mean, my experience has been in most of my analytics departments I've been a part of women have been underrepresented, you know, but for no good reason. Like it's the women we did have in the teams were amazing. Right. And it would be awesome to get more representation there. And there are a lot of great female content creators on LinkedIn. If you want examples to learn from, I'll throw some out there. Kristen Kerr is fantastic. She does a lot of machine learning stuff. She shares a lot of technical projects, which I think we used to work together, and I love Kristen. Susan Walsh is really good. Kate Strachny is she's somebody who's like at every live event, so she's probably like
she's
one woman
everywhere.
Really, yeah,
she hosted an episode of our podcast. Awesome. She's everywhere. I love her.
Yeah, she's fantastic. So those are folks you should definitely follow. Any other female voices you would recommend folks follow?
There's like Jess Ramos and Megan Liu on LinkedIn are also good, and they're like closer to like the beginnings of their careers too, which is cool to see. I think like I think it's empowering to see people who are like women who are younger too, who are like paving the way, and it's like makes you feel like you can do it as well. So I think
Jess says the things that like the employer doesn't want you to say.
She's very honest.
I think she's fantastic. She's going to be on the show in August. We haven't published the show yet, but she'll be on the show. She's fantastic, and I feel like she does kind of a good job sticking up for employees in general and employee empowerment, and it's definitely been fun to watch her find her voice and like feel strong, and she's amazing. I would definitely recommend both Jess and Megan are really fun. Yeah. Anybody else? Sorry, I keep putting you on the spot, but these are
you're
great
good.
names.
There's a few more, but honestly, I either don't know how to say their last names, or I would need to like reference. But I would say like LinkedIn, you know, recommended section is always good to like see, you know, who's out there talking. Love this question. I think like it's definitely a group effort for those who are already in the field to make sure that their teams, their space is welcoming, and that we can like amplify voices at conferences, on LinkedIn, from all genders. So
yeah, awesome. And Mark, thank you. Mark posted a link to Jess's LinkedIn, so thanks for doing that. And let's see, we can get a couple more questions in here. So let's see, which has a lot of upvotes. This one, curious. This is another one from Mark. Could you share a story about data storytelling? So meta, maybe a client or like an Alteryx case study, like any good stories about data storytelling?
Yeah, let's see. To be honest, like at Alteryx, it's also kind of meta. I'm talking about data storytelling, and I'm talking about like how our products, like one Auto Insights, can help you tell better data stories. That's what I talked about at the conference. So it was like I was just using like sample data for that, but basically the product like uses some AI infused with it so that you are really just like importing your data, and it's selecting, metrics and creating these stories, explaining what changed, why it changed. That's a big one. And it's kind of like a nice place to build off of from like what it generates. I would say like in my time as an analyst, like to be honest, being like kind of brand new when I started and then left at 2 years, like I feel like I was just getting into that piece about data storytelling. I think I did learn a lot about dashboarding and how, you can use dashboards in your data stories and such, but sometimes we were creating such complex dashboards or trying to incorporate every single little request and every filter and everything, and the overall like message and story would get a little bit lost. And like if you're ever having to like create dashboards on top of dashboards, or like people are downloading the Excel from the dashboard to like tell like their own specific story, like it can get out of hand. And so I think that there I learned a lot about like focusing on the message, and sometimes a dashboard is really more for the more technical users or the people who like are working with that data and they understand and they want to see it sliced and diced 100 ways. But then like to really like tell the story and share the value of it, like something simpler would be more beneficial. And I guess one other piece, like something we did at Stanley was like, as we were like implementing the Alteryx software and automating more things to kind of like share the value. It's kind of also meta, like tell the story of what the analytics team was doing, how we're adding value. We did like a little video series where we'd like talk to our stakeholders and be like, this solution saved me this much time, and like tell this interesting story. We had some great team members working on making them fun and interesting. And we see that in the blogs too, people sharing their stories about like what their analytics product did. And so I guess that's another piece of data storytelling as well. And it's cool to just see like the impact that has when it's told in a more engaging story format of whether that's a blog or a video. Like it's just a lot more gripping, and people are like, oh, like maybe I could like simplify my process with this type of solution. So
I love the idea of telling the story about the value that the data team is bringing, because like for us who are on that team, it's like of course it's easy for us, we think there's a lot of value, we get it. We're also probably pretty biased and we want to think our work has value, right? But think like a senior manager in a company, they're thinking about, like you said, the time it saved me or the cost it saved me or the revenue it made me. And when you can kind of show the value there, it's like it does get people more excited than, oh, I did this project. It's great to kind of sell and quantify the results.
Right. Yeah. People at that level don't want to see your code thrown up on
they don't want the details.
Zoom meeting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. one more that I think is a really good one. I'm curious if you have answers to this. Kimberly asks, where do you find data conferences? It's a really interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, honestly, it's like on LinkedIn. I've kind of like curated like a group, like I basically follow and connect with a lot of people in the data space. And especially people with like that already have following, they'll be posting about going to certain conferences. So I think, yeah, LinkedIn is a good place to like hear about where people are going and what's happening. Yeah, and for me attending, I guess like it's mainly just our company's conference, but I love it. It's called Alteryx Inspire, but yeah, I don't know if you have any insight on that one, John.
No, I mean, I was going to say there's a few that are really good. I posted in the chat a link to Kate Strachny, who, like, I don't know how she has the time or the energy, but she is at like every event. She's amazing.
Yeah.
And so if you just follow her and pay attention, she'll let you know like the events that are coming up. And then another person that I would check out, I'll post in the chat here, is Brandy Beals. And so Brandy, with Dustin Shimmick, together they run the Data Careers Summit. I think they're doing it twice a year now, but I could have that wrong. It could be just once a year. But that's a great one where it's a digital conference, but they get a whole bunch of different speakers from different backgrounds. So think kind of like, Megan's podcast or this show where we try to get a varying guests giving valuable insights to the audience, but they pack it into a couple of days. So that one, the Data Careers Summit, is a really good one. I think it's going to be in October, but don't quote me on that. And I don't think it's published yet. You were fantastic here. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights with our audience and everybody who showed up today. Thanks, and appreciate you guys participating. Hope to see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, John. It was fun.